Most Vietnam veterans I know still cling to the notion that they could handle one more war and at least two more women. But all that I know of war and all that I've heard of peace disavow me of any such romantic illusions. I don't know that I'll ever be able to understand, much less handle, any women. And I didn't handle my own war all that well. I once thought that made me less of a man, being traumatized by something that we'd all been told was some sort of rite of passage from adolescence to maturity. I never heard my father or his brother talk about being overwhelmed by World War II, and his brother had flown bomber missions over Germany. They survived and didn't complain, so I thought there must be something intrinsically wrong with me. I was afraid that we were the least generation of soldier, that we complained too loud and too often, and in doing so, that we cheapened our service, we blurred our sacrifice, and we wallowed in our suffering. I had help, of course. Our own generation, if they thought about us at all, saw Vietnam veterans as suckers. Our father's generation thought us losers for not being able to conquer a ragtag bunch of rice farmers. And me, I didn't know what to think. I was hurting. I was confused. And that guy who had carried me through the most terrifying times of my life was now a stranger to me and to those around me. It was but a blink of an eye from a violent Sunday night when I killed a man from ambush to a disoriented Friday back home among those I'd left behind when I went off to war. It's over, they kept telling me. It's over, just forget about it. In real time, they were right, of course. But my reality was somewhere between what I'd left behind and what I couldn't fully walk away from. My war was indeed over, and over and over and over again, playing in my mind on an endless loop. The same heat, the same hurt, the same horror, always ending with me alive and so many of my friends dead. It didn't take me long to realize that surviving combat was almost as bad as not surviving. But why did it take our government so long to realize it? Why did it take the psychiatric profession so long? Why didn't our fathers tell us the ugly, immutable truth about war? That never does anyone return as the same person who left. Primitive societies knew it. They had no Dr. Phils, no Sanjay Guptas, no plethora of pop psychologists to gum the problem to death. But they had experience. They knew what war did to the soul and the mind as well as to the body. Reach back into antiquity. Go all the way back to Virgil and his classic, the Aeneid. In Book 2, Aeneas recognizes, "In me, 'tis impious holy things to bear, red as I am with slaughter and new from war. Till in some living stream I cleanse the guilt of blood in dire debates spilt." Aeneas knows he has murdered and he has plundered. He knows he has offended the gods. His survival does not excuse it. His cause cannot justify it. He knows that he must atone for his combat conduct and cannot even touch the cherished things of his life until he finds that living stream in which he can cleanse the guilt. Why didn't anyone tell us that which the ancients knew? Why didn't they tell us about the guilt of dire debate and blood in battle spilt? Why didn't they help us find that living stream of cleansing? Writing centuries after Virgil, but with the same sting of truth, Rudyard Kipling wrote of his son's death in World War I. "When they ask us why we died, tell them because our fathers lied." Kipling's generation lied by touting the grand romance of war. It's hard for us to look back at the horror of the trenches and mustard gas and blind rushes into machine guns and think of anything romantic. Our fathers lied by omission, allowing us to believe that our war was like their war, that our cause was as righteous as their cause, and most of all, allowing us to believe that a grateful nation would take care of us in our pain and our suffering and our loss. My generation lied in silence as a new generation of warrior marched into battle. We failed to impart our knowledge. We did not share our experience. We committed the sins of our fathers, silently acquiescing to the necessity of war. In doing so, we ignored the lessons of our own combat survival, and thus inadequately prepared a new generation of survivors to understand, to recognize, and to face the immutable truth that we return from war far different than we left. Instead of preparing our troops for that reality, we pump them full of the army of one philosophy. We imbue in them the warrior culture of the few and the proud. We challenge them to challenge themselves, to face the test of honor we say war is. But even as our military triumphs in the physical preparation of troops for war, it fails to prepare for the psychological acceptance of the aftermath. Soldiers steeped in the warrior ethic, veneered by our national faith in force, saddle up for combat utterly unaware that the exhilaration of being shot at without result will one day be replaced by the psychic damage etched deeply into their brains. Certainly, the lack of preparation for social assimilation inhibits the process, and in that, many of us share varying degrees of responsibility. But at the core of the problem is the ugly reality that combat and exposure to combat change us in ways that the individual could never imagine, and that those entrusted with our care fail to address. Aeneas knew what we fail to acknowledge. The trauma of war changes an individual in such profound ways that easy reacclimation to civilian life is the exception to the post-combat rule. In 1918, Americans hummed along to a song that asked them, how are you going to keep them down on the farm after they've seen Paris? That song spoke to some of the ways the doughboys returning from the First World War would change. But I believe it was a gentle way of telling loved ones not to expect that their returning soldiers would be the same as those who left. A less gentle way would be to change the lyrics and to ask, how do we keep our soldiers sane after they witness the horror? My generation went off to war in the cinematic heroics of John Wayne, but I don't recall seeing Sergeant Stryker's soldiers blown into red mist by a booby-trapped artillery round. I never saw one of Stryker's men with half a face missing after being shot in the cheek. I never saw a movie medic's hands buried in a man's bowels, working to stanch the flow of blood. I never saw traumatically amputated limbs littering a battlefield, and I never heard the wailing of a soldier calling for his mother as his life leaked into the rotten earth of a country half a world away.